on my attention. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now. It's made with good intention.
Welcome to 1 or 200, the Independent Politics and Media Podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, Oliver, today. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good, actually, yeah.
Good. We've got just a range of stupid shit to talk about this morning. Lots of it is not really being covered, though. And before I get, social media folks saying, if it wasn't covered, how do you know about it? You know what I'm talking about. It has not been covered to the extent it should be. It has not been front page more often than not, and especially not in New Zealand media. I've got a range of stuff here that the New Zealand government has been up to as well. They're just going from weakness to weakness, and they're going to continue that. I don't know. They're not putting aside the accusations that they're not going to make it a full term, are they?
Yeah, it's certainly not a threateningly strong-looking right-wing coalition. Sorry, I know that my typing, I remembered the thing I wanted to talk about, and I know that interrupted your train of thought there. My apologies.
Oh, no, don't worry. I saw it, and yes, absolutely.
So I guess the I don't know, of the many clown show things that have taken place this week, we've had a bunch of objectively kind of funny infrastructural collapse issues. One of them a literal collapse, which there's probably not too much hay to make here, but it was just weirdly charming photos of a massive power line in Northland that fell down, that required a very expensive power reroute to try and sort of get power back online temporarily in Northland. But it just kind of fell down. No one's really sure why. Our energy minister went on record saying they're not meant to fall down, which I thought that was pretty insightful for Simeon, actually.
It's a fantastic. That's one for the ages.
They're certainly not meant to fall down. But it did. It was just lying in a field, and it had a very strangely quite endearing sort of photo of this power pylon just having a little snooze.
Rest now, you've worked hard.
Yeah, and there was a rumor, a lot of people talking about how apparently it was some maintenance guys just unscrewed some bolts on the base to try and sandblast it, and then it fell over, which, if that is what happened, is maybe one of the funniest industrial catastrophes in New Zealand history.
Well, look, no one died. So.
Yeah, exactly. So no one died. So in terms of catastrophe, just a catastrophic destruction of infrastructure, but otherwise no downside. Nobody got hurt. The power was back on pretty promptly as far as.
And the pylon itself still takes in pretty good nick.
But yeah, maybe they can just stand it back up again. Who knows? It's not my area.
But it's just amusing to have been talking about these infrastructural deficits for the last 2 terms now. And we're finally starting to see some of the ways in which that can impact people. Like, obviously something drastically wrong happened here that wasn't to do. I don't think the pylon was rotted through or anything. But the fact that it just put out power for such a huge region because there wasn't an effective contingency, that there wasn't energy infrastructure, useful energy infrastructure up in Northland is horrific.
And then, of course, right as that story is disappearing from the media, the Interislander Ferry then goes and runs aground. Again, just like one of those things where, as far as we can tell, nobody was hurt, and so it's just quite funny.
Yeah, it was a freight trip.
Yeah, and obviously, like, really expensive mistakes. And then it all sort of became sort of transcendental when somebody posted this like breathtakingly beautiful photo of the illuminated ferry just bashed into the side of a sort of cliffside, and it's so serene. It's such a beautiful looking photo that people can't help but joke about it, because it's got this sort of profound melancholy to it, of this sort of sad looking boat stuck on a rock.
It's good to have some beauty in the cast for once. It's feels so predictable as well. These predictions have been made. As soon as Nicola Willis cancelled the ferry upgrade, which had already spent hundreds of millions on, everyone would have just been waiting for this to happen.
Yeah, well, I suppose, yeah, I'll be curious to know in hindsight what they sort of find out about it, whether it was actually due to some sort of terrible maintenance failure, or if it was just, I don't know, maybe the captain fell asleep at the wheel. We'll see. I'm sure we'll know soon enough.
New Zealand infrastructure news aside, the National Party politicians have followed suit with just
Speaking of catastrophic collapse,
earlier in the week it's so cruel. It's so unfair and unjust. Trying to save some money by removing the disability top up for wages, which is like something like $53 million over 4 years. More years than that even maybe. And sending disabled people who are in the workforce back to a $2 an hour wage. And Nicola Willis had the temerity to say, oh, well, they wouldn't be able to get a job otherwise.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah. I'm reminded of the legislative thing that was happening sort of earlier this year in America and late last year, where a handful of states have started rolling back child labor laws. And they deploy the same sort of line of argumentation where they're saying, oh, you want children to be out of a job? What are you, a jerk? And now I guess we're doing the same thing here. I guess Nicola's like, yeah, that was a compelling argument that they were making there, but instead it's, oh, you want disabled people to not be able to work, even if they are being offered for some reason slave wages. Just baffling, really surreal choice.
Just so nasty. And seems like it's one of those things where it's a coin flip whether they're just nasty human beings or they calculated, oh, this is a small enough percentage of, and it could well be both. Small enough percentage of the population with no real power. We needed this 53 million to top up the landlord tax break. They're a good target.
Yeah, and I think that they do. Yeah, that community is sort of probably lacking in advocacy by sheer lack of sort of population representation. But it's also one of those things where it's just so obvious. I think they may have overplayed their assumption, going, well, there's only so many disabled people and family members of disabled people. Surely it's small enough that nobody cares. But they didn't account for the fact that most people have like a functioning conscience and go, actually, I'm also uncomfortable with you exploiting the disabled. It feels, I don't know, just intuitively feels a bit weird to me. I don't know.
A classic right-wing mistake.
Forgetting that people have hearts.
That was followed. Actually, I don't know what order these came in at this point. It's all a big swirling vortex by the Minister for Conservation saying we need to do a cost-benefit analysis on species extinction.
Yeah, and I think that was just before actually. It was, what an incredible soundbite where he's like, well, I know that we want to keep animals alive, but how badly do we want to do it?
They just don't know what government's for. It's absolutely absurd. And also, even if you did a proper cost-benefit analysis, it's incalculable.
Well, I mean, it's literally incalculable. Like we are, as human beings, sort of only just scratching the surface of understanding how the biosphere sustains itself. We're still experimenting. We talk about like the experimentation in the United States with things like reintroducing wolves in national parks and finding that it actually helps the biosphere immensely because it keeps deer population. We're still doing that kind of stuff because we don't really know what happens when a species disappears and what other species were relying on it. And it's not really something that you can find out very easily without the bad thing happening. We don't have big maps and flowcharts of what every species needs and what it sort of will do, how its behaviors will change. The one I sometimes think about is birds like pigeons in Australia, the ibises and stuff, how they sort of are seen as pest creatures, but it's only because they've had to adapt because we've destroyed their sort of natural way of feeding themselves, and they have become reliant on human detritus to sort of look after themselves. And then we resent them for it, which is I am a fierce seagull advocate. I am always I'm out, whenever I see people getting like mad at seagulls, or my friends sort of grizzle about seagulls that are sort of hanging around waiting for our food scraps. I'm like, that's our fault as a species. Humans, we did that. So give them your fucking chips, mate. Like
That's right. And even on like a purely cynical business analysis, if we go around destroying like all the bird species, for example, that we use as a tourist destination. And we have successive governments and right-wing governments in particular that want Tourism New Zealand to carry the economy. What's going to happen in a decade, 2 decades?
Well, I'll tell you what, we've got a pretty simple fix. We'll build a we'll convert Zealandia into a roller coaster theme park, and there will be a bit where the roller coaster slows down and it goes into a big house, and the house is called Species That Used to Live Here. And the roller coaster can just go through, and there'll be nice little like wooden cutout shapes of all of the bird species that used to be really beautiful, and say people used to come to New Zealand to see this. Obviously, we wiped it out through extreme carelessness and general irresponsibility. But look how nice it was. It was quite pretty, wasn't it? And look, because it's made of wood, you can actually get quite close and even take a photo with it, which you couldn't do with the real one. So in some ways, this is better.
Real ones will steal your chip.
That's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
We need to get jobs in PR for
You need to pitch this.
conservatives.
You need to pitch this to Nicola Wills.
Yeah, and I'll say, Nick, this is the strategy: is we need to start running smear campaigns on New Zealand's native bird life. Say, how well do you really know the Kiwi?
I think it's the only way to fight back against Forest and Bird and Greenpeace, honestly.
Yeah, and all those bloody hippies out there trying to keep animals alive. When was the last time you saw a Kiwi? You don't see them that often because they're skulking around at night. Who does that? Who else does that? Peeping Toms, sickos, burglars. You can't trust a Kiwi because they're not like us.
No, but this is the vibe of this government.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what else?
It's
what else
so wild. Like
It's
they're taking aim at all these what you call core Kiwi values, like around egalitarianism and environmentalism, liking small creatures. And we know those aren't those are all a facade as well.
Aspirational values.
Yeah, but I think they do tend to strike normal voters.
Well, I mean, even if they're not, even if you're taking the cynical view, which I kind of do, that we don't really embody those values, the fact that people believe that we embody those values means that they still react in kind. They still feel the same way they do when those values are being sort of obviously undermined or threatened. So the illusion is almost as important as if it was actually real. So.
And then the New Zealand Minister for the Environment said something like, you have to find a balance. And I think we've fallen too heavily on the side of the environment recently when talking about mining interests.
Yeah. Yep. We've just been the environment's had it too good for too long.
Even in the case that we have somehow, the way that extraction works here, it's like a 2% royalty. New Zealand isn't getting any of this. It's purely extractive. They'll probably in the next couple of weeks be referring to Norway, a place which has kind of nationalized extraction to some extent. We're nothing like that. This is all going offshore. It's giant strip mines. It's incredibly destructive extraction on fault lines. And all companies doing it do not give a shit. They really do not care. And there's evidence for this all over the world. They will leave all their mining trailings for the communities to clean up. They'll leave the oil spills. They'll just fucking gap. They will leave and leave the New Zealand public to clean that up. And under a national government...
I mean, that has quite literally happened. I mean, yeah, one of the firms that has been applying for a fast-track application for a strip mine is one of the ones that took themselves into insolvency last time they had a catastrophe. They basically just dissolved the business and then started a new one and said, hey guys, it's us. We're Mr. Snrub. And we're eager to start a new business here. And don't look into our list of shareholders. Don't look into the people who own or run this company. You may remember some of the names, but you won't remember where from. Don't worry about it. We're keen to come back and do this thing that we've only just heard of called mining.
And, again, this is what National wants. Is these...
It's full privatization.
Yeah, these are people who've paid their way in via campaign donations, but also they're ideologically aligned with the current National Party coalition with ACT and New Zealand First. These are not good people, and they don't have anything in mind other than their own advancement.
Yeah, and there is that sort of naked corruption component to it, is that they are enriching people who will ultimately enrich them, and they're not. There was a time in our nation's history where one, people were ashamed of this kind of thing and tried harder to hide it, and two, that they were actually scrutinized for it, and it's feeling increasingly difficult to get stuff like this to stick anymore, which is quite scary. These sort of very, very obvious conflicts of interest in political individuals and parties that don't have the same kind of cut through as they did in the past. We have politicians having what would be considered sort of Watergate level scandals every week now, and they don't even lose their job. They don't even they go, oh yeah, yep, that sucks that happened. Anyway, I want to talk about wokeness, and they just launch into something completely irrelevant, and everyone just kind of forgets. They just sort of move on, and media doesn't bother to cover it anymore because it's no longer sort of the new fresh meat. That it's no longer leading story. So
Look, it's not what the people want to hear, Oliver.
it is disturbing. It is disturbing to me, the sort of level of corruption that you can get away with in contemporary politics that you historically never could.
Yeah, and look, I'm not saying that reporters and journalists aren't breaking these stories, because there's been some fantastic coverage to get this in front of people in the first place. But like you say, it's not. Why aren't you running this person out of town? Go and get your scalp. Like I've seen scalps be pursued for far lesser reasons. Like go and doorstep these guys like you doorstep David Bain. Like
Oh, Jesus.
like seriously, why aren't you doing this? It makes so little sense to me. As someone who still thinks of journalism as an honorable profession, holding truth to power, like a fool.
Hey, look, I'll tell you, I'm going to give it another shout out because I was greatly appreciative of a little piece that I read yesterday by Hayden Donnell on the David Ferry webworm, talking about incarceration.
Mhm.
And if you know what that is, you should look that up. Go and read it. If you've bookmarked it, go and read it. It is Hayden Donnell talking about, firstly, about prison, but also about the sort of punishment mindset. And it is a fascinating little read, talking specifically about New Zealand courts and how we can do them better. And it's something that I'm personally very invested in. So I'm gonna plug that now.
Good.
David Ferry is Webworm, and it's the most recent article.
Yeah, this good. Like, there's a lot of good stuff out there. It's just, I don't know. I'm not going to get into a conversation about my critiques of journalism because I do that every day on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm trying to offer the carrot here. I'm trying to say we have great journalistic work going on out there, but we don't have enough people doing that type of work.
Well, we will launch into some journalism critique soon, but before then, the
boy.
final misstep from the National Party this week, which is Christopher Luxon is overseas doing the junket bit, traveling around to our some of our economic allies, some of our markets, and this time when New Zealand's on the world stage, they have the A-listers with them and not the C-listers that the Labour Party would often take.
I'm going to let you cover this one because I have a controversial take on this that I'll save for afterwards.
Oh no, I want the controversy.
Fine.
Basically, all I was going to say is that none of the people, like the media, went and looked this up. Who are these C-listers that he's talking about? The CEO of Zespri, for example, the CEO of Auckland Airport. Not C-listers. CEO of Fonterra.
Yeah.
Just truly, again, by Luxon, such a lack of understanding of what he's doing, and willingness to punch all around him, just swing around him in order to try and make himself look good.
He certainly failed to read the room, but I'm of the opinion that, in fact, in doing so, he has accidentally said the correct thing.
Oh wow, this is controversial.
And that Luxon has actually come out as a spokesperson for the working class and said, you know what? CEOs are all a bunch of useless trash. They're all just a bunch of mongrels and mutts running around doing nothing of actual value while the frontline workers. So I assumed when he said, the previous business delegation that the Labour Party took was a bunch of C-list losers. What I assumed was going to happen was on his business delegation, he was going to take a bunch of union leaders and frontline workers.
The C stood for capitalist.
That's the thing. That's the thing. So he was going to take the elite, the truly good people that represent New Zealand business, the people who are actually doing the work. But then he didn't. No, he just took a bunch of other different C-listers that he happens to be mates with. But it is, all joking aside, I mean, these types of delegations are 10% work and discussing trade agreements and 90% a taxpayer-funded holiday for you and your mates. Because that is the majority of what goes on in these types of things, is they go out drinking, they treat themselves to very expensive dinners, they take their partner along as part of it for some reason.
You need emotional support, mate.
Well, I think Christopher Luxon, he is such a Yankophile that he just really sees himself as the contemporary of the President of the United States of America. And he's trying to do the sort of Michelle Obama type thing of going, well, my wife is very involved in all sort of matters of state, and she's going to be a big philanthropist lady.
But keep her out of politics.
Yeah, don't criticize her, don't mention her. However, I am going to use my position to elevate her to some kind of NGO. It's this idea of sort of trying to create from whole cloth this idea of like a first lady of New Zealand, which is not something we do here. It's profoundly weird. It's weird even to see the way that Americans do it, because it's like, what do you mean? Like, why is this random person involved in politics that wasn't elected just because they married the right person? That's
because they're close to power,
strange.
and that's how this stuff works.
Yeah, and I guess I think that's what he's trying to do. Jacinda had the decency of hiding Clark Gayford away,
as you should. Always hide your Clark Gayford.
You got to, yeah. He's a bit, yeah. He was mostly kind of embarrassing. So
roll him under the couch.
She was making the right choice there. But yeah, Luxon's obviously. You know what? I've in the middle of that sentence, I've switched positions, and I've decided that we need to celebrate men who elevate their wives and treasure their wives. And honestly, he's a feminist for it. That's yeah. That's the completion
Feminism,
of my
workers' rights. Christopher Luxon taking New Zealand into a proletariat future.
Yeah, and taking those bloody CEOs down a peg. But then, unfortunately, he was forced by David Seymour to take a bunch of different CEOs on his delegation, which undermined his point a little bit. But I know deep down, Christopher Luxon is secretly, yes, a champion of the proletariat.
Okay, now final bit of New Zealand news before we move into the much worse international news. And that is this just increasingly ludicrous coverage of the heaviest air quotes you can imagine, Chinese spying in New Zealand.
Oh, man.
Yesterday, an article came out which talked about a situation that occurred within corrections. It seems like it was a privacy breach, which would have been a great story to cover.
Yep.
Except, I think the person who breached privacy might have been Chinese, and the people they're looking up might have had Chinese names.
So maybe for some reason,
nothing could be proved that he handed those on to anyone.
Yeah.
There's no evidence of anything other than the initial impropriety occurring, but let's slam a link to stuff investigative journalists The Long Game specifically about Chinese spying over decades onto the top of the story to imply that this is part of the draconic fingers of China reaching into New Zealand and controlling every little facet.
Yeah, it is one of those things. It's incredible how far that rubber band can stretch in terms of credibility. This idea that Xi Jinping is keenly interested in the goings-on of Mount Eden Correctional Facility, down to the individual inmates. He's eager to know what's happening with them. Is a completely insane thing to believe, and yet it's published in print that could be a thing, just purely an insinuation. But it is. That does seem to be the way that the West likes to talk about China, because it's so difficult to find the sort of strangeness, this idea that people that China is involved in every sort of layer of civic society, and this sort of paranoia around it. But people do tend to sort of internalize and believe that. I mean, I remember when all the sort of Western news media was running the story about how the Chinese government had kidnapped Jack Ma. Otherwise, pretty rational people sort of talking to me about it and saying, "Yeah, it's so crazy that they kidnapped Jack Ma." And I was like, I mean, we have no evidence for that yet." And then, like a few days later, when Jack Ma was like hopped on camera and was like, "No, I'm fine. I'm just like hanging out on this beautiful desert island, like holidaying because I'm a billionaire and I'm on a private yacht and I'm doing whatever I want and drinking on a beach." People were like, the Chinese government must have forced him to say this. Like they'd already internalized this idea that he'd been kidnapped, and so when this obvious complete decimation of that lie appeared before them, they assumed that it was a deeper layer to the lie, to the story. And that's the sort of hysteria that sort of surrounds discussions of China in Western media, but also in the Western mind. And it's difficult to fight. I don't know if fighting is the right word. I don't know if I'm trying to fight it. It's strange. The way that conservatives and some people sort of who consider themselves relatively centrist talk about China is objectively insane, but for some reason it's very normalized. They talk about China as though they are a hostile force, an enemy. There was a guy on RNZ News who believes that we need to be arming ourselves and gearing up for war with China, Peter Zayan.
Oh yeah, he wasn't just on the news. He was on a special segment with Guy and Espiner.
Yeah.
And
And
this guy's
this man's
a
a complete
freak.
lunatic. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a genuine freak.
But he was convinced that we need to be preparing for war with China, which is firstly not something that's on the cards, but secondly not something we could ever hope to win. But for some reason, people view this as a country that is one of our longest standing allies in the Pacific,
Biggest
and
trade partner.
number one trade partner. In fact, our economy basically is completely reliant on exports to China, and
Just like they want it to be.
yeah, that's the thing. I mean, they're very close to Australia. Australia and China are relatively close in terms of how much stuff they buy from us, and the UK is a little bit sort of third place, I think. So maybe if we could, like, if we go to war with China, maybe Australia would be willing to double the amount of stuff they import from us, and the UK would be willing to double, and then that would cover our economic shortfall. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what the mindset is. Is like
it's racism. Like,
and
I like.
Yeah, well, that's yeah.
I'm very comfortable to like be saying this as well. The amount of just shit that people are allowed to get away with as soon as they mention China, and often it is mentioning China and not the government of China, which is a clear giveaway, folks. It's too much, and you can't. If someone is just using innuendo, if they're saying, "Oh, we don't have," they're saying in an article, "There's no evidence of this." In fact, the people we asked said that they hadn't seen any evidence of this, and we have been unable to dig up any evidence of this. And then that is used as innuendo for like,
and that's because they're so good at hiding it. Yeah.
And you accept that, and you just accept that as being a fact or like sufficient for reportage. You're a little bit racist, at least a little bit. There's a level of just outright garbage that politicians, media, etc., think tank folks, spooks, grifters are allowed to get away with in New Zealand if it's anti-China. And it's because there's a low level racism across the population here.
And you can see it in the way that they were talking about this idea that maybe China might have been involved in some kind of possible interference around discussions of COVID in New Zealand. And again, completely unsubstantiated, but it's fine. You can talk and you can make whatever insinuation you want about China as long as it's China. But then at the same time, within the same week, we had conclusive, categoric proof that the United States of America, from Reuters, a full report that the US government, and this is what I find weird, is that they do that thing where they say, well, the Pentagon did it. And I always find that very suspicious when they say the Pentagon did such and such a thing, because it's very clearly a way of sort of obfuscating the fact that it was the US government. They're like, oh, well, the Pentagon, who knows what those guys are up to. But it's
I'm
like,
going to
no,
give the heading of this.
Yeah.
And again, yes, they start with the Pentagon. So it's a Reuters investigation. This is insane. This is one of those things where if Russia or China had done this and there was this amount of evidence, they'd like, the war hawks would start fucking screaming.
Oh, it'd be like a 3-month news cycle. Yeah.
Pentagon ran secret anti-vax campaign to undermine China during pandemic. But it gets worse.
Yeah.
And this has not been reported in New Zealand media, by the way, as far as I've seen. And it's certainly not been given a headline.
I haven't seen a single outlet cover it. Yeah, but the US government was actively caught red-handed, actively engaged in spreading COVID disinformation, specifically because they wanted to harm China.
And okay, so this is a subheading.
What are we,
Like this stuff. Go and read the whole report, because it's just wild. The US military launched a clandestine program amid the COVID crisis to discredit China's Sinovac inoculation. Now remember that Pfizer, for example, refused to release its patents to help the global south fight this virus.
Yeah.
Like that was a huge thing at the time. We had the ability to stop COVID very early on with vaccination, and the US pharmaceuticals companies and the European pharmaceuticals companies refused to release it to the global south.
Despite the fact that the entire research process for that had been funded by taxpayer money as well. So incredible rod.
So China was giving out Sinovac for free. I want to be clear about that as well. They were like, the access to it was open. I was trying to get it to as many people as possible. Hyphen. Payback.
No, hang on. We need to talk about that. Why were they doing that? They must have had some sneaky ulterior motive.
Oh, like using vaccine programs to get into the global south and target political opponents.
Yeah, like maybe making friends with other countries by doing nice things for them, which is evil.
Maybe undermining the entire history of medical aid by using a vaccine program to go after Osama bin Laden in Pakistan.
I'm always remembered of that adage about how every time China visits a third world country, they get an airport, and every time the European Union visits a third world country, they get a lecture. And how that is how the embarrassing way that the West sort of tends to report on Chinese soft power. Because like it would be naive to assume that China wasn't benefiting from it. Of course they benefit from it.
Superpowers, man.
Yeah, they are alliance building. But we have to then imply that the way that they're alliance building, which is through kind of pretty breathtaking infrastructural generosity and benevolence, we have to act like it's all really sinister. But it's just like, no, they're just winning people over by giving them things. You should try it. Like, what if you did that?
I remember when the US was like China with the Marshall Plan going, and they were the bad guys then somehow.
That's the thing. Yeah, it's just they don't want to match China because their goal is to be extracting from these countries. And so if they then started going, oh, well, we'll invest in you to help develop you, then they're not getting the profits that they're trying to get. So they have to then imply that what they're doing is noble, extractivism is noble, and investment in infrastructure is somehow secretly evil because you're China, because you're the evil country.
This is that again. It's that baseline racism that allows them to get away with just ludicrous claims. I'm going to start that subheading again.
Yeah, please.
Because we've had a big segue now. The US military launched a clandestine program amid the COVID crisis to discredit China's Sinovac inoculation. Payback for Beijing's efforts to blame Washington for the pandemic. One target. This is so fucking insane. The Filipino public. Health experts say the gambit was indefensible and put innocent lives at risk. Guess what? Health experts are right. So this campaign started as targeting the Filipino public, who are ostensibly a US ally, just to push them further away from China.
Well, also, there's just no way that shit wasn't breaching containment. There's also no way that shit was exclusive to the Philippines.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, there's questions need to be asked about the
where else were
movement
you running this
across the world now.
Yeah, and do you have any idea how much of this stuff was leaking out into the public consciousness? Because we are a global internet community now.
There was there's all this talk during the fucking the early days of COVID where they talked about disinformation as a virus, what the amount of spillover from having the Pentagon running a disinformation vax campaign would have been immense. It's probably like one of the progenitors for the entire, what do you call it, like rebirth of the modern anti-vax movement.
The kook movement, yeah. Well, they're more than just the anti-vax movement now. They're the anti, like 10 different things now. They're sort of, it's, and we know that private enterprise is pouring money into that too. We know people like Atlas Group are doing that. We know that the Israel lobby is doing that kind of thing as well, because you see these sort of baffling confluences of beliefs now. An old coworker of mine who I've sort of watched go over the hill over the last few years. He was very, very anti-lockdown, very, very anti-vax, and he's kind of completely gone off the deep end with all that stuff. And he was very, very angry about the way that the Parliament protests were handled. But he also doesn't believe that pro-Palestine people should be allowed to protest. And so he was very, very suddenly in support of police crackdowns on protesters because he supports Israel. And it's very clear that he doesn't have any sort of interior process for formulating political views. He's kind of just getting battered around by the winds of lobby groups. And that's how you can form these incongruous ideas as well. It's fine when we do it. It's fine when we protest the government for vaccines, but it's bad when you protest the government for genocide. So that is a blunt way of putting it, but that is as simple as it is you can have these completely contradictory views because you are just being pulled around by the nose by whatever group has most recently invested in disinformation in your area. Because it's fine when we do it, which is like that's I guess the modern day motto of like Israel as an entity. It's
the historical motto of fascists. This is kind of how it is. I'll share one more quote from the article, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So this is a quote from within the investigation. "We didn't do a good job sharing vaccines with partners," a senior US military officer directly involved in the campaign in Southeast Asia told Reuters. "So what was left to us was to throw shade on China's." The thing that blows me away about that is how meaningless like that activity was, but the damage done just for like a little jostle of geopolitical kind of needs or wants kill people.
It also it sort of highlights to me so many other bizarre and insane things people claimed about China during the pandemic. The way that everyone sort of still goes on about this idea of thinking that Wuhan created the virus, which is to me a very, very bad, toxic belief. Because the message that we send there is, if you discover what a virus is, we are going to blame you for it. The big lesson China probably got from this last thing was, next time we isolate a virus, let's just look out for ourselves and fuck everybody else. Because if we warn the world, they're going to claim that we released it.
Well, this guy that they had on RNZ, like, again, well-known lunatic, Zaihan, he's on record as saying China intentionally infected the world.
Yeah.
Like, and this is he's put on like a top show on a national broadcaster just to fucking mouth off. Anyone in media, anyone in politics and the public should see that as a problem. It's like having not quite Alex Jones, but a precursor of Alex Jones, someone who hasn't quite gone off the deep end yet.
Oh, just a more presentable Alex Jones.
Yeah, on national media, presented as a serious source. It's disgusting.
Yeah, and he was among the people who claimed that China was just boarding people up inside their houses and killing them during COVID. That was another one of those sort of bizarre lies that was able. And then you look at what the US was doing in the Philippines, and you go, oh, I get it. Like, that's how this stuff got so much traction, was because there were interest groups that were sort of constantly pushing anything they could to make it seem like China's objectively humane, progressive, human-focused response to COVID as somehow evil. And they would just do whatever they could. They would say,
look, if you're not letting people spread the virus, you're actually a bad guy.
If you found out what the virus is and told the world with a good amount of warning, you're the bad guy. If you developed a vaccine and distribute it for free throughout the third world and neighboring countries, you are, in fact, the bad guy.
Especially if other people weren't doing that.
Yes. No. Well, no. The right thing to do was spend millions and billions of taxpayer dollars on buying it from a private company in America. That was the noble and correct and right.
If you could get your hands on it. If you weren't a poor country.
Yeah. Crazy. Over
to Israel. where
Well, I tried to segue here earlier.
yeah, I mean, I took us back like a fool.
Well, no, it is important that we cover, because our Chinese
Yeah.
paymasters do insist that we give it a full 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
important. It's the only way we keep this podcast afloat, because we're all conspiracy theorists.
So thank you, Xi. I will cash the check later.
Beautiful. Occupied Palestine, I should say, but known as Israel.
The Zionist entity, yeah.
Across the world. Continuing this genocide in Gaza, getting worse and worse and worse. Reportedly has now destroyed the Rafah crossing, while running propaganda about how the UN aren't getting aid in fast enough, showing all the aid there that they can't get in because they destroyed the crossing.
Well, also because they killed all the UN aid workers.
Yeah.
There was one of their sort of spokespeople on Twitter was saying, why is the UN not distributing all this aid that's getting in? And someone just replied with a graph showing how like over 210 US aid workers and how there has never in the history of the world been a country more dangerous to be a humanitarian worker than Gaza, ever. Not even close. The next is like a 10th in terms of death count of humanitarian workers.
Yeah, and that would have been over years.
Well, the other thing is the statistical improbability of it, the impossibility of it. The fact that you can kill that many aid workers means in previous situations, it's typically been collateral damage. It's been clear that aid workers have died because they were in amongst the sort of people. With the sheer disproportionate numbers of aid workers killed in Gaza, there is no other explanation than Israel is actively targeting and deliberately killing aid workers, UN aid workers. And for some reason, we haven't just like full coalition ground invasion taken over that country yet. But it's because we're terrified. We live in fear of the United States-Israel coalition.
And every time they do an atrocity and nothing happens, the US doesn't stop them. And to be clear, that's the only way really that this can stop, is if the US doesn't want it to happen, but the US does want it to happen. So no luck there. They just do it constantly. It's a few weeks ago there was a big massacre in tents in Rafah. They bombed a bunch of kids. Now it's every day. They just bomb kids in tents every day.
They keep being the feedback they keep receiving is there is nothing that will stop us from abetting in these war crimes.
Yeah.
There is nothing.
To be the most evil monsters possible. That's what we love. I think I saw a report this week that there were something like 35 million tons of detritus, rubble, debris, including all kinds of hazardous materials like asbestos, as well as human remains, that mean that it's almost impossible to clean Gaza up now, like to rebuild. And like we've been saying since the start, that's the intent. That is what you do in a genocide. You ensure that life cannot be lived, and everything Israel is doing, is in service of that. Anyone saying otherwise is lying, because they're a genocidaire.
Lying or delusional to the point of nothing that they say has any relevance at all to anything.
Yeah,
it should be discarded
reality
without any kind of examination.
Yeah, it's fucking disgusting.
You cannot believe that Israel is still a benevolent or good actor in any of this and still have anything credible to say, because the assumption should always be that you're probably wrong about everything else. Everything else.
Yep.
The level of delusion required to still be in that position means that you are not capable of cogent thought. And yeah. Speaking of, it's surreal to sort of see that the man, the sort of, I guess, grand puppeteer behind so much of this, Joe Biden, is barely capable of cogent thought himself, doddering around during a genocide, watching this man at a concert, just sort of wandering off, and having to be sort of grabbed by other world leaders and handlers.
Multiple times.
And then seeing his press secretary going on the news and saying, well, those are all deep fakes, which was something I was sort of talking about years ago when people were saying, oh, well, deep fakes are going to be really dangerous because they're going to be able to make these fake videos that appear like politicians are saying things they didn't say, or that horrible things are happening that didn't actually happen. And I remember at the time saying it's going to be the exact opposite. It's going to be the exact opposite. They're going to start using the existence of deep fakes to start claiming that actual war crimes and terrible things that politicians do are not real. That's the actual danger. And that danger is now realized with
lo and behold
sort of claims that, Joe Biden's not senile. Those are just deep fakes being spread around by, I don't know, China, Putin, who knows.
And also, I do like, despite that, I don't want to let Biden off the hook either. He's got, his entire political service has been in aid of the Israeli project. He's a horrible, horrible man, and it's looking to get worse. So Israel dissolved the war cabinet over the weekend, and that probably means that the far right parts of that government are going to have a bit more of a handle on things now. Stuff is escalating in the West Bank.
They're just nakedly bombing Lebanon now.
And they're threatening Lebanon and saying they're going to go to war with them. And the fact that, again, nothing is happening. And we said this earlier on, the US wants a war in the Middle East, not just a genocide. They want Israel to drag these other countries in. As far as Christian Zionism is concerned, Israel must do that in order to take back
the world,
greater Israel as they see it, to bring about, the apocalypse, and so they can all ascend to heaven. It's
awesome.
It's cool.
The lunatics are in charge, and the ones that aren't crazy are just absolutely mendaciously evil. It rocks. It rocks living in these times.
Wow. So I think we've done the whole scale of hilariously nasty and evil to not funny evil.
Not funny
anymore. This episode.
It's good.
Thank you for joining me, Oliver.
Always
traverse
a pleasure.
That.
I think we navigated it quite well, actually. Much better than the Interislander, anyway.
Where can people find you online?
Well, you can't. I'm hiding. No, you can track me down on Twitter if you want. I wouldn't recommend it, but at Oriwa is my handle. I tweet about, I don't know, stuff too often. A mixture of stupid bullshit and current affairs. So I can't please anyone.
Hey, look, and none of us should be trying to. Thank you as well to our audience for listening in this weekend. We'll be back maybe midweek, maybe next week for current events, depending on what comes across our tables. We'll catch you then.
Awesome.
If artifices are denied, living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paid with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when the criticism cost me ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day.